The United States calls its president the commander-in-chief, the leader of the free world. But power at that level comes with pressure, and sometimes the wrong decision slips through. American presidents have enjoyed moments of glory, but they've also left behind decisions that became embarrassments the whole world remembers.
I have today ordered to Vietnam the Air Mobile Division and certain other forces which will raise our fighting strength from 75,000 to 125,000 men almost immediately.
Some of them were born out of arrogance, some out of fear, and others out of plain miscalculation. Let's count down 5 of the most humiliating presidential decisions in American history. At number 5 comes John F. Kennedy's decision to authorize the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. Kennedy was young, charismatic, and hailed as the fresh hope of America.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
But in his very first year as president, he walked straight into a disaster. The CIA had cooked up a plan during Eisenhower's term, train Cuban exiles to invade Cuba and overthrow Fidel Castro's communist government. On paper, it sounded simple: land on the beach, spark a rebellion, topple Castro. And Kennedy, worried about appearing weak against communism, signed off. But here's where the decision turned from bold to foolish. The plan assumed the Cuban people hated Castro enough to rise up. They didn't. Many Cubans actually supported Castro because he had thrown out American-backed corruption and promised land reforms. The invasion force was outnumbered, outgunned, and stranded on the beach within 72 hours. To make matters worse, Kennedy had refused to give the exiles full U.S. military support, fearing it would expose America's role. So when they were pinned down, no American jets or soldiers came to the rescue. America's fingerprints were still all over the operation, and the whole world watched the so-called leader of the free world bungle an invasion that ended with Castro stronger than before.
With Castro claiming the capture of 500 invaders and threatening them all with the firing squad, these weeping women see no chance for their loved one.
Kennedy himself admitted later, victory has 100 fathers, but defeat is an orphan. That orphan sat squarely on his shoulders. The failure also had ripple effects. Castro ran straight into the arms of the Soviet Union, setting the stage for the Cuban Missile Crisis a year later. Kennedy had hoped to get rid of a communist headache, but instead created one of the most dangerous moments in Cold War history. From there, we moved to a decision that didn't just embarrass a president. It changed the way Americans trusted their leaders forever. At number 4 is Richard Nixon's handling of Watergate. In 1972, Nixon was running for re-election. He was already leading comfortably, but paranoia got the better of him. Nixon had a long history of insecurity, convinced that the media and political enemies were always out to get him. His campaign team approved a burglary at the Democratic National Committee headquarters in the Watergate complex, aiming to plant bugs and steal documents.
Mr. Nixon, did you know about the burglary of our Democratic National Headquarters at the Watergate?
When the burglars were caught, Nixon had a chance to distance himself, admit mistakes, and salvage his reputation. Instead, he chose the path of cover-ups, lies, and secret recordings. For 2 years, he insisted he was innocent, but the tapes told another story. The moment the smoking gun tape was revealed, showing Nixon ordering the FBI to halt the investigation, it was game over.
Now, on the investigation, the Democratic bringing it back, we're back in the problem area because the FBI is not under control because Dre hasn't exactly got how to control, and their investigation is now leading into some productive areas because they've been able to trace the money, not through the money itself, but through the bank.
Facing certain impeachment, he resigned in 1974, the first U.S. president to ever do so. The most powerful man in the world, reduced to a voice trembling on national television, saying, "I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow."
I have never been a quitter. To leave office before my term is completed is abhorrent to every instinct in my body. But as president, I must put the interests of America first. Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
It wasn't just Nixon's downfall. It was the death of blind trust in the presidency. Until then, many Americans had believed their leaders were flawed, but ultimately honorable. After Watergate, cynicism became the default. People began questioning not just Nixon, but the very office itself. Every president after him has been haunted by comparisons. Is this another Watergate? The irony is that Nixon had won re-election in a landslide anyway. He didn't need to cheat, but his paranoia made him destroy himself. If Watergate destroyed trust, the next decision destroyed lives halfway around the world. And number 3 is George W. Bush's decision to invade Iraq in 2003. After the 9/11 attacks, America was burning with anger. The Taliban in Afghanistan were toppled quickly, but Bush and his team argued the bigger threat was Saddam Hussein in Iraq. They claimed Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, nuclear, chemical, biological, that could fall into terrorist hands.
I take the threat very seriously. I take the fact that he develops weapons of mass destruction.
Bush pushed the case hard, even declaring in his State of the Union address that Saddam had tried to buy uranium in Africa.
The British government has learned that Saddam Hussein recently sought significant quantities of uranium from Africa.
The problem? Much of the evidence was weak, some of it outright false. Still, in March 2003, the U.S. invaded. Baghdad fell quickly. Bush stood on an aircraft carrier under a mission accomplished banner, and it looked like a decisive win. But then came the reality. No weapons of mass destruction were ever found. Iraq collapsed into chaos. Sectarian violence tore the country apart. The U.S. got stuck in a grinding war that cost trillions of dollars and over 4,000 American lives, while hundreds of thousands of Iraqis died. The invasion also fueled anti-American resentment worldwide. For many, Bush had turned a tragedy 9/11 into a justification for an unnecessary war. Al-Qaeda grew stronger, and eventually, ISIS rose out of the ashes of Iraq. What started as a bold strike against tyranny ended as a humbling reminder of what happens when presidents make decisions based on shaky assumptions. And what makes it more painful is that many of Bush's closest allies later admitted the intelligence was flawed, leaving the U.S. looking reckless on the global stage. If Bush's blunder was about going too far, the next one was about failing to go far enough. At number 2 is Jimmy Carter's decision during the Iran hostage crisis. In 1979, Iran's Islamic Revolution toppled the Shah, who had been supported by the U.S. When America allowed the ailing Shah into the country for medical treatment, Iranian students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, taking 52 Americans hostage. Carter faced a nightmare every day the hostages remained in captivity. He looked weaker. He tried negotiations, sanctions, and appeals, but nothing worked. Then he approved a secret rescue mission called Operation Eagle Claw. In April 1980, helicopters flew into the desert, but a sandstorm and mechanical failures doomed the mission. One helicopter crashed into a transport plane, killing 8 American servicemen before they even reached Tehran.
8 of the crewmen of the 2 aircraft which collided were killed, and several other Americans were hurt in the accident.
The world saw images of charred wreckage in the desert, America's most daring rescue attempt, ending in flames. Carter's presidency never recovered. He lost the 1980 election to Ronald Reagan, with many believing his failure to free the hostages made him look powerless. What makes Carter's decision so embarrassing is not that he tried, it's that the operation was underprepared, poorly coordinated, and rushed. Even U.S. military leaders admitted afterward it was a disaster waiting to happen. The hostages were finally released on Reagan's inauguration day, almost as if Iran itself was mocking Carter. And yet, even Carter's humiliation doesn't compare to the one decision that still haunts America's conscience the most. At number 1 stands Lyndon B. Johnson's escalation of the Vietnam War. Johnson inherited a small U.S. presence in Vietnam after Kennedy's assassination. At first, it was just advisors helping the South Vietnamese fight Communist North Vietnam. But then came the Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964, where U.S. ships reported being attacked by North Vietnamese patrol boats. The details were murky, but Johnson seized the moment, asking Congress for sweeping powers to wage war. He got them. Soon, hundreds of thousands of U.S. troops were in Vietnam. Johnson kept promising victory was near, but body bags kept coming home. Villages were bombed, jungles were burned with Agent Orange, and images of napalm-burned children horrified the world. The war dragged on, dividing America like never before. Protests filled the streets.
We have protested that use of the university in the past.
Soldiers lost faith in what they were fighting for, and television brought the horror into every living room. By 1968, Johnson was so politically broken he announced he wouldn't seek re-election.
I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
And in the end, America withdrew in 1975, with helicopters lifting desperate people off rooftops in Saigon.
This is a historic moment, the arrival of the North Vietnamese regular army in Saigon, right in the middle of Saigon, just after 12 o'clock, just after noon. Here they are, pouring down the main avenue.
The superpower had lost to a small, determined enemy, and Johnson's decision to escalate based on a questionable incident became one of the most costly mistakes in U.S. history. The humiliation didn't just end with defeat. It left scars that shaped American foreign policy for decades. Presidents after Johnson hesitated to send large numbers of troops abroad, always fearing another Vietnam. It was more than a military loss. It was a blow to American confidence, a reminder that sheer power can't bend the will of a determined people. From Kennedy's reckless gamble in Cuba to Nixon drowning in paranoia, Bush betting on false evidence, Carter frozen in the desert sands, and Johnson sinking America into a war it couldn't win. These decisions weren't just embarrassing. They showed that even the most powerful office on earth is vulnerable to fear, ego, and miscalculation. The world remembers their failures, not because America is weak, but because the mistakes of its leaders remind us that power doesn't guarantee wisdom. And history, unforgiving as it is, never lets those mistakes disappear.